We are in Torah Yutet and Likutey Moharan, Seif Gimel, part 3 in this Torah. And this Torah is called Tfilah Lechavakuk Ala Shigyonot. Tfilah Lechavakuk. And in this Torah, Rebbe Nachman is explaining to us the process to rectify our tzaddik. Each one of us has a tzaddik, and we want to bring that tzaddik to its state of perfection. And allow that tzaddik from that state of perfection to influence the whole world with its positive energy, with the essence of its positive energy. And there are two parts to this. There is one part of this is that we recognize the significance and the importance of receiving the light of the tzaddik, the collective tzaddik of the generation, the tzaddik that is the pillar of the whole world. And Rabbi Nachman explains to us that the way that we can accomplish that is by visiting the tzaddik, learning Torah from the tzaddik in person, gazing upon the face of the holy face of the tzaddik when you're receiving Torah from the tzaddik. And that's the greatest way to receive the light of the tzaddik. And then each one of us must go through a similar process so that our personal tzaddik may shine through and radiate its positivity throughout the world. And what that is, Rabbi Nachman describes that metaphorically as becoming a mirror, becoming absolutely pure and holy and clear and clean, where you've dissolved the ego to such a point where you're not holding anything for yourself. You're part of the oneness of Hashem. And therefore, now that you're like this mirror, one of the characteristics of a mirror is that everyone sees their own face in that mirror. And so now, everyone that gazes upon your face will recognize their own flaws and be naturally, intrinsically motivated to fix that flaw in themselves. And so just by being, not needing to say anything, just by being, the tzaddik causes everyone in the world to rectify themselves, to lift themselves up, to purify themselves. And so Rebbe Nachman outlines for us the process that we can go through, that the tzaddik went through, and that we can go through in order to get to such a level of clarity that others will see themselves in our face like gazing into a mirror. And this process involves the perfection, the purity, and the holiness of the brit, of sexuality. Okay? And that is accomplished through the two pillars of Tikkun HaYesod, of the rectification of the sphere of Yesod. Each one of us is a small world, and in each world there are 10 sphirot, and the sphere of the Yesod is the sphere that represents the sexuality of a person, and this, the purity that we want to get to, the holiness that we want to get to, the rectification of the Yesod that we want to achieve, has two parts to it. Okay, these are two pillars of the Yesod that are, one is dependent on the other. And one of them is the holy language. Okay, the holy language, Lashon HaKodesh, Shleimut Lashon HaKodesh, Rabbi Nachman calls it, the perfection of the holy language, of holy speech. And the other one is the actual, where a person has dissolved the burning furnace of lust for immoral and illicit sexual behavior. Okay, Rabbi Nachman explains to us that the power of the holy language is such that it dissolves and it extinguishes that burning furnace of that lust for immoral sexuality. Okay, and so that burning furnace of gamma brit, that burning furnace of the corrupt and the fragmented state of the fragmentation of sexuality, okay, where it's been completely destroyed and fallen to a disconnected animalistic lust. And so that furnace, that burning furnace, Rabbi Nachman says, is the fire that includes within it all of the immorality and all of the all of the immoral behavior, the improper ways of living of all of the 70 nations, all of the negative character traits, negative characteristics, and all of the animalistic tendencies of the ego. There are 70 different types, Rabbi Nachman says. And all of them are included, all of them come together as this burning furnace of lust for immoral sexual behavior. And what dissolves and extinguishes that lust, what dissolves and extinguishes that concealment, the power of darkness that conceals the light, the concealment of all the 70 nations, that power of concealment, the collective concealment of all the 70 nations can be extinguished through the perfection of the holy language. Shleimut Lashon HaKodesh. And the perfection of the holy language is the aspect of the woman, and the woman of valor. It's the woman, the God-fearing woman, and it's the aspect of being in awe of Hashem's greatness, Yirat Shamayim. And that perfection of the holy language that comes about through fearing Hashem, being in awe of Hashem's greatness, is dependent on how pure we are in the Yesod, how much we've rectified our sexuality to a state of pure holiness. And so one is dependent on the other. And last time we spoke about how you're supposed to, if it's this vicious circle that just escalates from the destruction of one to the destruction of the other, then how are you ever supposed to fix one if one cannot be fixed without the other? And Rabbi Nachman explains to us that we have places throughout Likutey Moharan where we have the similar concept of two points that are dependent on each other. And Rabbi Nachman explained that you work on both of them simultaneously. So at the same time that you're working on purifying your sexuality, dissolving and extinguishing that fire with an inner sense of calm and peace, an inner sense of what's called da'at, awareness, godly awareness. At the same time, simultaneously, you work on increasing the perfection of holy language, your holy speech, purifying and lifting up your speech to a state of holiness. And that's dependent on your level of awe of a Kadosh Baruch. Again, there are many ways that a person can increase their Yirat Shamayim, their fear and the awe of Hashem. And mainly it's through meditating and contemplating the greatness of Hashem. The Arizal teaches us that a person should gaze upon the vastness and expansiveness of the sky at least once a day, preferably in the morning. Gazing upon the vastness and expansiveness of the sky causes a person to release and let go into that sense of awe of the expansiveness and the vastness of the world, of the universe, what does it mean that Hashem is infinite, right? When a person works on that, contemplates that, meditates on that day after day, then every time they are increasing another level, another degree of their fear and awe of Hashem. And that will complete and perfect their speech. Okay, and then that will also carry over and purify, increase the holiness of the yesod of that person, the sexuality of the person, and which will come back and increase the awe of Hashem, that a person can experience greater awe, deeper awe of Hashem, recognize the greatness of Hashem in a greater way. He's no longer falling for the lowly points of attraction, of the physical world. Now he's in tune with the tremendous points of greatness, godly greatness, Hashem's greatness, the transcendent one. Okay, and so it's a completely different point of focus. Either a person is focused on any tiny spark of something is interesting or something is shiny in the physical world, okay, and then a person is very shallow, okay, and there's no depth to that, okay, or a person has managed through this process that we said it's a 2-point process that you work on simultaneously. Person has shifted to that other focus where a person is in tune with the finer things. And the finer things means that they're in tune with the vastness and the expansiveness of the spiritual experience, experiencing the divine, experiencing the transcendent one, experiencing the beauty, the infinite beauty of the Torah, where sometimes a person can learn something in the Torah and just sit there with an open mouth in awe, just overwhelmed by the beauty of it. Okay, and so that's the shift that is going to happen when a person works on this rectification of the Yesod. And so here we're up to this part, and Rebbe Nachman is explaining to us the connection between the Lashon HaKodesh, the holiness of our speech, the holiness of the language, and the holiness of sexuality. These two levels of holiness, Lashon HaKodesh and Brit Kodesh. Both of them are called Kodesh. Vezeu kabed et Hashem mehonecha. Kabed daika. כי בו תלוי בחינת כבוד. כי הפך הכבוד מחרבות וביזיונות, והם תולים במקום ארעין. כמובן בתיקונים, ולא יתבוששו, אין בושת אלא במקום ארעין. So, says Rabbi Nachman, and therefore it says in the pasuk that we mentioned last time, kabed et Hashem mehonecha, you should honor Hashem from your wealth. And last time we spoke about how the word mehonecha is also read migronecha, with your voice, meaning with holy speech. And so you honor Hashem with your holy speech. And last time we spoke about how that is through the perfection and the making holy, making the sexuality holy, lifting up the sexuality to a state of holiness, okay? Because we brought the pasuk that a person who surrounds himself with harlots, okay, which is immoral sexual behavior, he will lose his hon. He will lose his wealth, but he will also lose garon, the perfection of speech, the holiness of speech. And so one is connected to the other. And now Rabbi Nachman is bringing that other pasuk in Mishlei, kabed et Hashem mehonecha. It's over there. It's in the same parak, in the same plate in Mishlei, not in the same parak. It's in parak Gimel pasuk Tet, that it says that you should honor Hashem with your wealth or with your speech. What does it mean that you honor Hashem with your speech? So Rabbi Nachman is explaining to us here that holy speech is synonymous with holy sexuality. Tikkun HaYesod. When the Yesod is rectified and brought to a state of holiness, at the same time, a person has lifted up their speech, their speaking, Lashon, to a state of holiness, okay, to Lashon HaKodesh. And that means that you have now shifted to a state of honor. That's what Rabbi Nachman is teaching us from this pasuk. Honor Hashem with your speech means that when you've rectified your speech to a state of holiness, which, as we spoke about before, is dependent on rectifying your yesod, okay, your sexuality to a state of holiness, then you have now honored Hashem. You have now tapped into the divine honor, the divine glory. Why is that? And Rebbe Nachman explains to us here that all honor and respect and glory is dependent on how much a person has rectified their yesod, how much a person has lifted themselves up from the animalistic version of sexuality, the animal sexuality, to a state of holy sexuality, okay? Divine sexuality, where it's used in the highest way. Okay, and so that's what Rabbi Nachman is explaining to us here, that the reverse of honor, shame and disgrace, charafotu bizyonot, all of the shame and all of the disgrace and all of the guilt in the world is the product, it's the effect of a blemish, a corruption, a deficiency in the sexuality of a person. Wherein a person has allowed the sexuality to become, to fall into a state of animal sexuality, okay, that it's just because of the animal desire, and then a person has fallen into shame, disgrace, guilt. These are all the same energy frequency, and this is something that even in Eastern religions, they've also they say a very similar thing to this. So that's really interesting. And so all the guilt and all the shame and disgrace that people experience is because of deficiency in how pure and holy, a deficiency in the holiness and the purity of their sexuality, where they fall into that disconnected, fragmented state, that animalistic state of the animalistic version, okay, of the animal version of sexuality. And so that's what Rabbi Nachman is saying here. Vehem tolim bimkom arayin, kamuva batikonim velo yitboshashu, en boshet ela bimkom arayin. The Tikkun Azar teaches us on the pasuk in Bereshit. The pasuk in Bereshit says that before the sin of Adam and Chavah, of the Eitz Hadat, the tree of good and evil consciousness, before they sinned, they were in a state of Eloi Bashashu. They were in a state of there was no shame. They were walking around naked. They had no clothing on, and they didn't feel any shame, any disgrace, any dishonor. They were in a state of absolute dignity. They were not like the animals. Okay, they were in a state, they were like godly. They didn't, they were also, as we know from the Medrash, that they had a certain covering, a certain light that was surrounding their body. Okay, and so that's like a certain glory, it's a certain light that was surrounding their body, like we know from the famous Gemara that in the Torah of Rabbi Meir, it didn't say kotnot or, it said kotnot or with an aleph, right? And so this implies that that the perfected state of Adam and Chavah is a state where they're surrounded by this light. Okay, and then through the sin of Eitz Hadat Tovara, through the sin of the Eitz Hadat, they fell into a kotnot or, like the Zohar says, that they were covered. Then they fell into the state of mashcha dechivya, the skin or the hide of the primordial serpent, and that's the kotnot or with an ayin, which means the skin or the hide that now was covering them. Okay, and so before they sinned with the Eitz Hadat Tovara, and we're going to see throughout the story, we're going to see in a few places that the sin of Adam and Chavah by the Eitz Hadat Tovara is all a sin of immoral sexuality. In fact, let me explain something right here that's really important to know. The Arizal teaches us, there's a famous Medrash. The Medrash says, and Rashi brings this in Bereshit, that the primordial serpent, the Nachash HaKadmoni, why did he want to cause Chavah to sin? And it says that he wanted to cause her to sin because he was jealous. He wanted to take her for himself. Why was he jealous? So Rashi brings the medrash that says that Adam and Chavah were having sexual relations during the day in the field in front of everyone. There was no shame at that point. There was no shame at that point. And because of that, the serpent saw them together and he wanted her. And so that's why he wanted to cause them to sin, and so that then he would be able to take her for himself. And so this is the medrash. The Arizal teaches us, very interesting, and the Arizal teaches us that the main sin of Adam and Chavah is that before they actually ate from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, they had sexual relations together on Friday afternoon during the day. And as we know, Friday afternoon during the day is the time where it's not yet the proper time for the unification in the higher realm. In the spiritual realm, there's supposed to be a unification of Friday night, okay, between the Tiferet and the Malchut, between the Yesod and the Malchut. And we spoke about this, how there's the connection between the 6th day or the 6 days of the week with the 7th day. And that represents something in the spiritual realm where there's the 6 sfirot of the Tiferet, what's called Kudsha Brichu, Zer Anpin, that are unified with the Malchut, with the Shechina. And that's how we spoke about in previous shiurim. Every Shabbat, there is a renewal of the whole world, because the Malchut represents, it's the Shechina, it's Hashem's presence in this world, in the physicality. And the Yesod, or the Tiferet, the Zer Anpin, is the transcendent aspect of Hashem. And they're unified on Shabbat. There's a unification that brings about this new light, this renewal of life energy for the whole world for another week. And so by them involving themselves in sexual relations during the 6th day of the week, on the Friday afternoon, before Shabbat, at a time when there is all of these forces of darkness that were created. As we know, the Medrash teaches us that the shadim, the demons, and the forces of evil, the forces of darkness and concealment were created on the 6th day in the afternoon before Shabbat. And so at that time, they try to attach themselves on that light that is going to be brought to the Malchut, that is going to be given over to the Malchut, to the light, to the presence of Hashem in this world. They try to steal it for themselves. And by Adam and Chavah involving themselves in this unification, right, in their physical unification, which is also a spiritual unification, at a time where there was not yet that protection from those forces of darkness, because it was still in the Friday afternoon, and that protection only happens when Shabbat comes in at night. But they did it in a time where there's not yet the protection from those forces of evil, those forces of darkness. And that's why we see that the Medrash says that the serpent saw them. What's the serpent doing over there? The serpent was not yet, they were not yet protected from forces that are represented by the serpent. Okay, and so that's what he was doing there. And what does it mean that he was now jealous and he wanted her for himself? It means that because they were together at that time, and the time where they were vulnerable to the forces of darkness, to the serpent, now he was able at that point to attach himself, to somehow get in. Okay, and that's why they became vulnerable to sin by the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara. But says the Arizal, if they would have waited for Friday night to be together, then none of the sins and none of the lack and none of the deficiencies and destruction that happened would have happened. And so really the main sin, or the beginning of all sins, was immoral sexuality. But at the same time, it's called in the Torah that they ate from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara. And so what you can say is that the eating from the tree of good and bad is kind of like a metaphor. It's just another representation of the same sin. They also sinned by eating from the tree of Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, but eating from the tree of Eitz Hadat Tov Hara was just the same story that happened again. Okay, and so it's the same sin that they did in another way. Okay, and so it was the effect of having that blemish, that deficiency in their sexuality. Okay, by having sexual relations in a time and in a place where they were vulnerable to the forces of darkness, and so that means there was this animal, so to speak, this animal aspect to it that was able to attach itself to that holy act. Okay, and that's what caused them to fall to the sin of eating from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara as well. And so before they ate from the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, it says, V'lo yitbashashu, there was no shame. There was no shame. They were not embarrassed. And why is that? So the Tikkun HaZohar says that embarrassment and shame and disgrace is the aspect that only exists in a place of nakedness. Okay, and nakedness means pigama brit. Nakedness, the fact that a person experiences, feels that they are naked, is because they see themselves as, and they've fallen to a state of being like an animal. Okay, now everyone in the world is in that state, and so people that try to deny it and say that, oh, you don't need to wear clothing, they're just fooling themselves, and they're just completely delusional. But now that we have, the whole world has fallen to a state of yitboshashu, a state of this shame, okay, a state of, we're not yet at a perfected yesod. So now that the world has fallen into the state because of the sin of Adam HaRishon, the way that we protect ourselves is by covering ourselves up, by being covered, by being clothed. And when we clothe ourselves, as we know, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan kara limani mechabduta. Rabbi Yochanan used to call his clothing that which honors him. So the clothing is what gives us kavod. Without clothing, we would be in a state of shame, because as a human being in this state of humanity, we've all fallen to the state of shame since the sin of Adam HaRishon, because we are not yet perfect in the sexuality. The Yesod has not yet been perfected by us to the state of perfection that Adam and Chavah had before the sin. Okay, and so at this point, the way that we protect ourselves from that shame is by covering ourselves up with clothing. Okay, that's why also clothing is called in Hebrew levush. Levush is made up of two words. I think the Maharal says this. Levush is lo bosh. I am not ashamed. The levush of a person, the clothing of a person, protects the person from shame. Okay, but Adam and Chavah, before their sin, they were in that state of perfection. There was no shame involved. Shame only came after they had fallen to immoral and illicit sexual behavior. And that's what the Zohar teaches us, that shame and embarrassment is only in the place of pigama brit. Only when there is sexual immorality, that blemishing and a destruction of the holiness of the brit, then a person is in a state of shame. Okay, and that is the aspect of the orlah, the foreskin. The aspect of the orlah is as we spoke about before, it's what's covering up. The Zohar teaches us that the foreskin is in itself, it's the manifestation of the skin or the hide of the snake, of the serpent. Okay, because when the Adam and Chavah sinned with the tree, with the Eitz Hadat Tov Hara, it says that Anachash Ba'al Chavah v'hitil ba zuhama, says the Medrash and the Zohar, that the serpent forced himself onto Chavah, and he injected within her his venom. And that venom caused all of humanity to be susceptible to death and to have all of the physical limitations, and also the animal self, the ego, and all the desires, the animalistic desires come from that. Mashcha dechivya, as the Zohar calls it, the hide of the serpent. And the Zohar says that the manifestation of that on the body is the orlah, is the foreskin. Okay, and when we cut that off, that is the beginning of the process to purify ourselves, at least to purify the body, at least the physical body. Now we've cut off from the physical body the aspect of that, the hide of the serpent. Now there's also the attitudes and the behaviors and the thought processes and the way that we live our life that we also must purify, right? Our speech, all these other aspects of orlah, of the foreskin, the spiritual aspects of it that we fix. Also, like we spoke about, circumcision of the heart, right? Hashem, that comes, that's the next stage. But Hashem blessed us through Abraham with the ability, with this mitzvah, that we are able to cut off this foreskin and separate from our physical body, separate in a tremendous way, separate in a very significant way, separate the hide of the serpent. Okay, and so the aspect of the foreskin represents the shame. It represents the disgrace. It represents the embarrassment. It represents guilt. It represents all of these low frequency energies and emotions and feelings that are in the place of arayin, in the place of nakedness, in the place of immoral sexuality, of animal sexuality. Okay, it's all in that place of blemishing and concealment of the holy brit. The concealment of the holy brit, what's that foreskin? It conceals the holiness of the brit. וזהו כבד שהוא הפך של חרפות וביזיונות, שהוא תולה בהונך, היינו בגרונך, שהוא שלמות לשון הקודש כנ"ל. And so here Rabbi Nachman finishes his explanation and he says, that's what the pasuk is telling us: honor Hashem with your voice. So what does that mean? It means that honor, which is the opposite of shame and disgrace, the opposite of embarrassment and guilt, honor, you can merit honor, right? The perfection and the purity from all of that shame, the perfection and the purity from all of that sexual immorality. How do you merit it? Through holy speech, through garonecha, through your voice. When you lift up and you perfect your speech to a state of shlemut lashon hakodesh, the perfection of the holy language. And then he's going to explain to us how this fits into what we know about Yosef. But we'll see more about that, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next year.